Welcome to Practical Privacy. Today we're going to look at the challenge of achieving your goal of becoming a DPO, and I have Naveed Malik, Group DPO Legal and Governance for Informa with me. Welcome, Naveed.
Thank you, Orla. It's a pleasure to be here.
So maybe if you can give us a little bit more context around the challenge you were facing.
Yes, the challenge I want to talk about was coming from a non-legal background and making that kind of leap at a time when DPOs were going to become a requirement under GDPR. Taking that leap without that non-legal background into becoming a DPO at a large, complex organization, as I am now. And so, what did I need to do in order to bridge the gap that was there? And what steps did I look to take, and what strategies did I seek to employ, the ones that worked and the ones that didn't? So I think that's the key thing, and I think probably something that will resonate with a lot of people.
So maybe can you talk us through the things you started doing initially that you felt were not necessarily the right approach?
Yes. And so, coming from a non-legal background, I got into data protection, is worth saying, joining the Information Commissioner in the UK. And so what I had the opportunity to do was really learn data protection law and practice day in, day out, really get hands-on with the legislation. And so I really understand it from a very nuanced perspective as a kind of case officer and a lead case officer. And so developing that knowledge and that technical expertise in the law gave me a level of confidence when it became apparent that UK GDPR was going to pass and DPOs were going to be required to fill, I think thousands of positions across the UK and Europe. But I was a relatively junior member as a lead case officer, and so I wanted to try and understand, how do I become a DPO? In that context, I thought that the most obvious thing was to leverage my experience in terms of technical expertise and start to apply for roles in the private sector initially that were starting to spin up. Everybody else was reading that these requirements are going to be there. A lot of organizations had taken the first steps on putting their job adverts forward. And so I thought, well, I'm at the regulator. I've got a really good understanding of data protection law and practice. I've got a really good chance. And what became apparent was that there were things that I was lacking in terms of my overall kind of offer as a data protection professional. That was, there were things that people were looking for, hiring managers were looking for, that I simply didn't have. And I really have that opportunity to build those out at the ICO. And I think leadership, managing people, and having that sense of understanding the complexities of the organization in the private sector and to some extent in the public sector were things that weren't apparent. So as a strategy to try and move into the private sector as a first step, I simply didn't have what hiring managers were looking for. So I needed to gain that experience somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. So how did you go about doing that? Because you say when you don't have it, it's very hard to achieve it.
Yeah. And so what I think was important was understanding, well, in which context can I work, where there's maybe a lower barrier to entry, where I can start to pick up some of those important skills. And I think that what worked for me, coming from a regulatory background and therefore a public sector background, was moving into public sector in an established organizational governance framework. So an organization that already had something in place. They weren't getting caught out by GDPR. It was just going to be an add-on to what they already had. And so for me, that option was going into local government as an information governance manager. But to make a case that I was managing people, I had to manage people. And in order to do that, I took myself outside of the work context and started volunteering in order to, as part of a soup kitchen, supporting the homeless. And in that role, I was able to then start to lead volunteers. So when I then had the opportunity to interview for roles as an information governance manager, I could rely upon the experience that I had managing people in that soup kitchen. So I had to kind of step outside of my existing role in order to pick up additional experience. In addition to that, I had to present, my thoughts as part of that interview process. So I did a lot of reading around, you know, how to effectively present and communicate ideas. And it wasn't great, I'll be honest, that first time around, but it was good enough that I was able to get that role. And because it was as an information governance manager, what it allowed me to do was to step into an already existing, kind of data protection organizational role that they're already dealing with subject access issues, FOI complaints, and they'd already aligned with kind of central government-backed governance framework, right? So they weren't creating anything from scratch; it was already there. And so what I was able to do was then have the opportunity to learn about those kind of frameworks and how those operations were expected to be and delivered. And then that allowed me to also, I was managing one individual. So then I was able to start to build that experience up, being a leader as well, which is key, but also communicating effectively with stakeholders. I was ultimately going to have to be appointed DPO within that role. It was my expectation that was going to be the case. But I needed to spend my time in the role closing that gap of being a DPO leader. And so that was a key thing. So we're going into the public sector in an existing kind of organization with that operational framework was a way that I could learn on the job, and that was a key way to go in. My initial strategy versus this was more fruitful.
Excellent. Okay. So if you could go back, let's say, and do it all over again, what would you potentially do differently?
I think the idea of going external from your existing role and picking up the skills was an important one. And I think that if I focused on leadership, on communication, on managing people in that role at the soup kitchen. And I think that there are other ways that I could have volunteered and built that experience and knowledge up as well. And I guess I didn't have the foresight at the time to think that that was a mechanism I could use with multiple organizations in order to build that experience up. And I think that if I probably could have predicted that there was going to be not a lot of clarity in the private sector around what the DPO role needed to look like. I think a lot of people were thinking it has to be a lawyer, it has to be someone with a lot of experience in data protection already in a commercial standpoint, someone quite senior. And I think, from my perspective, I didn't kind of clue up on that, and some time was lost through pursuing that role. And I think if I was doing it again, I would have thought, okay, it's quite clear. I know where I am and where I want to be. And, it was always useful to kind of get those opportunities within the role you're in. But if you can't, then there are opportunities outside of that, your existing role, where you can pick up those skills and use them in interviews to demonstrate capability.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think that's incredible. So if you could offer one piece of advice to your peers, what would it be?
I think be honest with where you are. There's always I'm assuming I'm speaking to people with a really good level of expertise in data protection law and practice who are able to build that up. But don't ignore the broader skill sets that you're going to need as a DPO. You're going to be expected to communicate effectively, be a leader, manage people, build meaningful relationships with senior leaders across business teams in the organization, and ask yourself, well, what do I need to do to kind of close those gaps? Do I need to, seek a mentor? Do I need to go and do volunteering somewhere? Do I need to, speak to people who are already in that role and who can give me an insight? Do I need to go on a course? What is it that I need to do beyond the technical expertise that you already pick up day in, day out? What other things can I look to do? Because all of those additional things that I've just rattled through are all going to be needed as a DPO that is able to ultimately change the needle in terms of organizational culture within large, complex companies, especially ones with a global presence. There's a lot of facets that you're going to have to need. The question is, do you know how far you are away from gathering those? And if you then are able to benchmark yourself and you have those gaps, do you know where to go in order to close them?
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's incredible advice, actually. Thank you, Naveed. So yeah, that's all for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Really appreciate you sharing your experience and your insights.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Orla.
So that's it for today. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe and share. Until next time.